Hello! Today you join me at the wheel of my very own Mini Cooper from 2001. In fact, it's May the 1st. This is its 20th birthday. It's 20 years old today. So let's have a look at where these cars came from, how they were built, and what they're like to drive. By the way, if you like this video, please do consider hitting the subscribe button while you're watching. Hello, welcome to Furious Driving, and today, May the 1st, 2021, it's the 20th birthday, or the build day if you like, anniversary of this, my Mini Cooper, the 202nd Mini built off the line. So this is actually a pre-production pilot build kind of car, very, very early production. There are a few changes from the standard car, but so as it's 2 decades on, the new Mini isn't really all that new anymore. So let's take a look at the car itself that shocked the world, and the Mini community anyway, and talk about how this thing came to be in the first place. But before we do that, I just want to take a moment to thank this video sponsor, Skillshare. If you've not come across Skillshare, it's an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creators. You can explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in thousands of classes across creative, self-improvement, and business topics. Now, as someone coming from a stills photography background, the world of video has been a steep learning curve. So for me, Skillshare has loads of filmmaking and editing classes which I wish I'd had access to when I was trying to figure out Final Cut Pro at the beginning. But as someone who's always trying to learn and improve all the things I do, I've been delving into Benjamin Halsel's classes on Final Cut Pro color grading to make my videos look better. But I'm looking forward to exploring more about music and design, and there's always more to learn about photography. And as the classes are broken down to convenient bite-sized chunks, it's not a problem to fit them in around my always busy day. But here's the best bit. Listening to experts talk about their passions is always interesting and rewarding. It's curated specifically for learning, so there are no ads, and they're always adding new premium classes. So you can stay focused and go wherever your creativity takes you. And it's about $10, which is about £7 a month with annual subscription. And the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity. So if the Mini had been a normal car, and if the company that built it had been a normal company, it would have been replaced a long time ago, at some point in the late 60s more than likely. In fact, there were multiple attempts to replace it throughout the decades, including by Alec Izagonis himself, who in 1968 proposed the 9X, which was a slightly larger hatchback version. Looked a little bit like a Renault 5, and you can still see it in Gaydon today, I think. So even he knew the writing was on the wall for the Mini many decades ago. Throughout the 70s, there were several more proposals of different cars to replace the Mini, but through lack of budget and management infighting, nothing ever came of it, until finally a new Mini emerged. In 1980, the Metro arrived. The Mini Metro, which didn't replace the Mini because it wasn't a normal company. So even though the Mini was costing more to build than they were selling it for, they soldiered on. By the 1990s, Rover knew times were changing and they were going to struggle to keep the car current. Buyers' tastes were changing, emissions were going to be a problem, drive-by noise was going to be a problem, and NCAP was going to be a major issue because there was not much structural strength in an original Mini and no way of engineering an airbag into it. So all these factors meant the days of the original Mini were numbered, whatever happened. So the Rover design team under Gordon Sked started working on various replacement concepts to bring in the new. However, by the time that BMW bought Rover in January 1994, nothing had really progressed very far. So they opened the field up to everyone pretty much. It was effectively a design competition. They took in ideas and concepts from Rover's designers at Canley, the BMW designers at Design Works in California. Even Giugiaro were offered the chance to come up with the idea that would become the new Mini. The British team at Rover had different ideas to the BMW team. Their thinking was to start where Izagonis had started as well, the 10-foot concept, and build a car for today around those same ideas and principles. Whereas Frank Stevenson, the man who actually did design the car, his idea was to take the Mini as a starting point, and he actually sat down and drew a different Mini for every decade, imagining that the car had been replaced decade on decade, generation on generation. So by the time you got to the millennium, you weren't looking at the second chassis, you were looking at the fourth or fifth. So he drew all these different versions, and this is the version they came up with. The R50 is the evolution. It's not a new concept, it's taking the Mini from its starting point to where it is today. And ultimately it was a unanimous decision. Both BMW and Rover people agreed this took the spirit of the Mini and moved it on into the 21st century. Now, being a Mini is more than just having a badge on the front, and Frank Stephenson felt he captured the DNA of the original car, and so did the boards of Rover and BMW, which is why it pressed ahead. And so there are various things which have stayed very much the same, but obviously have changed and updated. Although it couldn't be a 10-foot car long anymore like the original Mini, the design brief was to make it 3.6 metres, because then they could get a 5-star end cap. They could build enough safety into that size of a car. Now, looking at the front of the car, the two major things you'll notice first of all are the headlights and the grille. The headlights ape the original Mini headlights, being large and round and right out in the corners, but obviously to get more streamlining, more aerodynamics are now elongated slightly and pushed back, raked back a little bit to get some better aero. Then we have the grille, which looks very similar in shape and characteristics to the original Mini, but you might notice that the top half is in the bonnet and the bottom half is in the bumper. They had to split it for manufacturing reasons, and the feeling that Frank Stephenson was going for was this bulldog spirit Mini thing, and he kind of felt that this was like the mouth of the car, so it actually became more of a face because this is actually the mouth of it. And this bonnet was a bone of contention. And the reason we've got this big clamshell on the front of the car is because of this line here, this diagonal strake into the wheel arch, because on the original Mini there was a flange where two pressings met and were bonded. That's not an issue on this particular car, but in order to keep that really significant detail of the original, that was necessary to do this. And Rover engineers initially said they didn't want to, they couldn't do it, it was too big of a pressing at the time. However, they pushed forward and they managed to figure out a way of pressing something this big. There were concerns from the engineers about the flexibility and the movement of the bonnet, so the headlamps are now mounted into the bonnet itself, and it has latches at either side, so it stays locked down when the car is in motion. Now, a number of design tricks were used to make the car, first of all, look like the original car in a way, and also to appear wider and sportier, more hunkered down on the road. First of all, we've got these tail lights, which normally when you look at a tail light, it's flush with the boot line or even into the boot line. By having it as a separate item here in the rear wing, it actually makes the car look much wider on the road. Down here we've got this chrome strip in the bumper which sort of apes the original. In fact, it looks about the same size as the original Mini bumper pressed into the plastic of the modern impact bumpers. And looking at the sides of the car, the bodywork curves out much in the same way as the original Mini does, and then the glass, what they refer to as the tumble home, or the angle, is very, very vertical, so you have a bigger area inside the car, and also makes the car appear wider when you look at it from behind, as does this blacked out area of glass here, again making the car appear visually bigger. There's a great story about the exhaust pipe tip here on the back of the car, and this comes from Frank Stephenson himself. The design team were working late into the night with the clay styling buck, the full-size model of the car to be, and they were going to present it to management the next day. And at the last minute, someone noticed there was no exhaust pipe on it, and so I think it was Frank Stephenson himself took a Budweiser can, cut the bottom off it, and shoved it into the back of the clay, and that's why we have the beer can exhaust tip on the back of these cars. Under the bonnet is a really clever piece of packaging to make everything fit in such a small place. You've got power steering, air conditioning, power brakes, the battery, the radiator, alternator, all the usual stuff. It's all crammed in here, and it is really tight to find things, but they managed to do it. And worth mentioning while we're looking down here is that the car is inherently very, very strong. It was designed to pass the Euro NCAP with a 5-star rating, which I believe it did. Rover wanted to use wishbones, but BMW were adamant it was a BMW product. It was going to be struts at the front, Z-axle at the back, no question, no argument. So that's where it went. And that meant the front of the car had to be incredibly stiff, which means there's a two-piece box section of chassis rails here at the front with 1.5 meters of continuous welding, which means the car is incredibly stiff. And that was not just great for safety, it was great for handling as well. Now, the actual engine was a real bone of contention. The design of the car, the external design, was signed off in 1996. No arguments, no changes. This is how it stays. Rover engineers were assuming it was going to be the K-Series that went under this bonnet, because that would be a natural progression. It was in much of the rest of the range. It would be easy to use, accessible, it's compact. They knew it and all the rest of it. However, BMW had never made a decision. They weren't sure what they were going to use, and the problem was the K-Series was too tall. Rover engineers said, great, just re-engineer the bonnet, redesign the clamshell. BMW went, nope, not doing that. We've made a decision, and the designer, Frank Stephenson, says no. Everyone says no. Wolfgang Rietzel said, leave it with me, I'll come up with a solution. But ultimately, he announced that BMW and Chrysler were going to engineer this 1.6 litre chain cam driven 4-cylinder engine. Now while I've got the bonnet up, I'll show you a couple of things which mean that this is an early car. First of all, you can always tell when a Mini was built because the label with a date on it is down here on the inner wing. This car built May the 1st, and we know it's a 2001 car. Now, two things you can see here is it's lots of undercoat showing. That's because the colour coat was very thin in the under bonnet area, and the scuttles are made of larger but much more fragile hexagons. Right, so climbing into the car, you will notice a continuity jump because I've put a jumper on. It's chilly outside all of a sudden. The other thing you'll notice is that compared to the original car, which was tiny on the outside but huge on the inside, this is a bit bigger on the outside but not massively massive on the inside. Alex Moulton was really critical of this. He hated it. He said it was an example of exactly what you do wrong. He was a man scorned, I think. But sitting in the car now, you do feel actually quite roomy. You've got loads of headroom. The car is quite tall for its size. You've got lots of elbow room because the way the doors are sculpted back, you can put your elbows virtually into the doors, and you've got room in between the two people. So there's lots and lots of room. The design was considered retro, but Frank Stevenson said it wasn't retro, it was a development of the original. Right, let's take you for a walk around the interior of the car. Now, climbing in, you'll notice the big one-piece squeezy door handle to let you in, and also the fact it is a pillarless door. Very sporty and elegant. Now, this car should have a stainless or aluminium trim piece. It's one on the passenger side, but this car sadly has lost it a long time ago. Now, for the most part, the early cars, the pre-July launch date cars, came with the Kaleido red fabric interior. Some of the very early ones had a groove in the middle of the front seats, which this one is slightly too late by a matter of days to get that. I think the only exceptions to this were some very, very high-spec Coopers, which were available in silver with black leather and a sunroof. There's only limited spec options of these very early cars. These were standard on all these cars. This was a red interior option for a very short time with the red door cards, red basically everything apart from the carpet. Red door cards, red seats and red trim. But this was discontinued a matter of months into production. Another thing for these early cars, these pre-July launch date cars, are the pedals have got the Mini logo written in them. This is unique to these Y-Reg cars. All the production cars that were sold to the public on a 51 plate, they didn't have this. So I do have a spare accelerator in case this ever breaks. Now on the dashboard we do have this big chunky 2-spoke steering wheel with the Mini logo in the centre and little horn buttons here on the side. That's quite a horn and a half. Now you'll notice this silver centre section of the dashboard runs the full width of it. No glove box, but we do have an airbag on the left hand side. We have this big central speedo, so visible to the entire car basically. All your warning lights, the odometer, temperature, fuel, pretty much everything is here in this one central dial, apart from, which I don't think the One's got, only the Cooper's got this, was the tachometer here above the steering wheel. And you may have noticed the air vents as I sort of whisked across this silver panel, little round eyeball vents which have a kind of a retro feel to them as well. The whole design does hold together really nicely because everything just feels perfectly matched to each other. Above all of this we've got a massive flat T-shelf area, a slight tilt down but not too bad. You can stand a mug on there. There's a smaller flatter area here for condiments, further back sandwiches, lots of room for a picnic if you want. Big air ventage as well, so lots of ventilation into the car, although it does feel like a car that needs the air conditioning to work. It doesn't have like a free flow of air through it, so if the aircon is broken it does get really, really warm in this car. One thing you might also notice is there's no glove box lid down here. These early cars only came with a tray on either side. It's got a rubber base which can be lifted out to be cleaned, and it's got little scallops in there to stop things rolling around too much. Doesn't work, they do roll around far too much. And there is a matching one on the driver's side as well. Also there's your headlamp levelling control as well. Now in the centre we've got, flanked by these big silver columns basically, all our heating, ventilation and personal controls if you want. Radio, CD player was an option, cassette player was an option on some cars. If you check the build sheet you can see what your car would have had. Then we've got the blowers and fans, air conditioning of course, and then we've got these controls which were really unique to the Mini and were a real standout feature which got commented on all the time. These little chrome toggles for the windows, the fog lights, the central locking, and each one is flanked and blocked off from the one next to it by these little semicircular hoops. Later models actually got more of these switches up on the ceiling. In this particular car we've only got a little lozengey mirror and we've got a clock up here. Now down here at the base of these big silvery legs we've got two tiny cup holes which are basically totally useless because they are really short, really small and directly underneath this switch panel, so it's utterly pointless. There is the option you can get of a little tray for putting oddments in that sits behind here, and this car doesn't have that, but it was an optional extra and I am looking for one, so if one ever turns up on eBay I will grab it. Got your 12-volt socket down here. And then you've got your 5-speed gearbox with a lovely little half leather, half chrome gear knob. This is a replacement gear knob on this car, but it is exactly the same. Got it from the Mini parts department, so it's definitely the same item as it was previously. Electric mirror switch is down here. Then the handbrake also fits in this big kind of bold chunky style. We've got these chunky silver rings around the cup holders, which aren't any good for cups, around the gear shift. Everything's very chunky and bold and bulky, and this handbrake is no exception. We've got the leather insert, and we've got the silver paint and obviously the leather gaiter. Moving back we have got the one cup holder which is any good. Everything else is useless, but this one is actually quite handy. Then we have the doors themselves. This big armrest door pull thing is a really nice design. This whole massive lozenge, big round shape that just gives so much character and definition to the door. It recesses really deep in there, so as I said, you can put your elbow in there, makes the car feel wider. The bottom of it is big and open, so you got a huge tray for stuff in both doors. Really useful. And we have the sort of exposed, partially exposed screw fittings, which is very unusual on a car these days to have any fixtures or fittings visible at all. You have to look quite hard to see the screw heads in there, but that has been left open, interestingly. Then we have this nice chromy door handle, which is solid cast metal. I think the later ones may have been plastic, but the early cars were cast metal. And that's in a double ring, this little figure 8 with the tweeter, and the main speaker is down here in the bottom of the door. So we've got pretty decent audio from this. Now looking into the back of the car, we have the same red seats, red side panels, lots of exciting colours and interest going on. So you'll notice we've got two central seatbelt holders, or buckles, but nothing for a third passenger, just two little bucket seats. Each side panel does have a big loudspeaker and a huge cubby hole, so you can stuff all kinds of useful things in there, make the car very useful. And you'll find, now finally, the boot. It is not a massive boot by any means. This is not a car for wannabe gangsters who want to be taking unwilling victims any place, because this will not fit anything bigger than a spaniel, and that would be an unhappy spaniel like that. It does, however, have a light. I've disconnected this one because it wouldn't turn off and it was draining the battery, and a 12-volt socket so you can charge things in the boot, and it has a 50-50 split rear seat as well, so it is potentially quite a useful and practical car. You can get a lot of stuff in this space if you flip those seats down. Now, under the carpet we have got a toolkit which would have contained once upon a time an inflation kit, but I don't know where that's gone. I've now used that space for a set of jump leads because you never know. Your tow hook, that kind of thing, is all under the boot carpet. Because this car was designed to run flat tyres, there is no spare wheel as standard. You can go underneath this car and install, in place of this plastic panel here, an actual spare wheel hanging kit. And that is something I intend to do at some point, because I've taken the run flats off and put some quite nice Continental Sport contacts on instead. It runs so much nicer on them, but if I ever get a flat, I'm stranded. Now the last thing to mention is this roof, because the early cars didn't have any bracing underneath the panel, and so the whole thing wobbled and shook, and it's very easy to dent it. And you'll notice this car's got several dents across the roof because this whole panel is very fragile. So getting comfortable in the new Mini is pretty easy. The seats are lovely and squishy. They're old school comfy, like they would have been in the 90s. And they're adjustable for height and rake and lumbar support. And your seatbelt mount is also possible to raise and lower, so you can get exactly the right position to sit in. Now, driving the thing is simplicity itself. The pedals are surprisingly heavy for such a small car, especially the clutch. But it drives so easily, and the engine is quite willing. It's not the most brisk car in the world. 0 to 60 I think is over 9 seconds, so really not rapid at all, with 116 horsepower. Again, not exactly GTI hot hatch terrifying figures. And of course the car is heavy as well, designed very much with safety and rigidity in mind. The thing weighs in at over 1100 kilos. It's a lot of mass in this vehicle. Although it's no 0 to 60 killer, it is very, very nimble through the corners, surprisingly so in fact. And the engine does feel a little bit more charismatic than it does in some of the other applications that used it. I think some Peugeots and obviously a number of Chryslers have used this same engine. One thing that is really good on this car is the steering. They had, from Rover's end of the engineering side, been wanting to use a fully electric steering system, but the chassis engineers just felt it was completely numb, utterly dead, no good at all for a car that's meant to be all about driving spirit and driving fun. So they took the hydroelectric system, not hydroelectric, sorry, and so we do have a steering system which is absolutely loaded with feel. There's just a little bit of weight to the wheel, but not too much, and plenty of feedback from what's going on in front of you. The gearbox is pretty good. BMW had wanted to use a jet drag or get drag box, but Rover suggested and argued very successfully for the fact that the R65 gearbox they were using already was £100 cheaper, had less harmonic vibration issues, so would be easier to package, and was a smaller box in the first place. So again, far easier for internal packaging in that tiny, tiny engine bay. And so the Rover engineers won the day. Now, one of the real selling points of these cars was the big car feel from such a small vehicle. 3.6 meters long, but it rides and handles like something double that size. It's so very composed on the road, it's amazing. And with the BMW style struts, front suspension, Z-axle in the back, it is really composed. It may not be a straight line rocket, but put it through some B roads and it grips on and is enormous fun. And you can see how we're now on a fast B road doing 60 miles an hour. It's quiet, it's smooth, it's excellent. It's a real all-rounder. Now, probably the main reason the Frank Stephenson design won out over the other cars that were proposed is that this car really does just connect with the look and feel of the original Mini. I know at the time, traditional Mini owners were up in arms at being not a real Mini anymore, but he had designed it in such a way to evolve from the original car. It was built in the same factory by many of the same people. So in my eyes, it is a continuation. A Mark V Escort is still an Escort, even if it's completely different to a Mark I Escort. It's not the same car, but it's the same family. Anyway, the British design team from Rover Canley, David Sadlington, Roy Axe, Oliver LeGrice, they had very different ideas. They were starting off from scratch with only a minor styling nod towards the original car. And in fact, the one they were favouring most was the spiritual concept, which was designed to be two different sizes to replace the Mini and the Metro. But really it looked much more like a bulky IMEV rather than a Mini replacement. So it didn't really capture the mood quite enough. And so as this was trading very much on the look and feel of the original Mini, that meant it really was becoming a bit of a fashion accessory, and as a fashion accessory it meant you could accessorize, and the accessory brochure on this car was a tome of its own. It was said that in the first few years of Mini production, around 20% of the sale or purchase price of most new cars was going on accessories. You could do so much, from just changing the wheels and putting fog lights and spotlights on the front, to the different colour wing mirrors, different colour roof. You could put the covers on the back of the interior mirrors. You could have the decals, the Union Jacks on the roof, the bonnet decals. There was just endless options of personalisation for making your Mini very much your own, and people loved it. They absolutely lapped it up. And when Frank Stephenson went over to Fiat and designed the Fiat 500, the same trick was used, which is why you see so many different personalisation options on the Fiat 500s. Now, you might be wondering why these pilot build cars exist at all. And if you look at the classified ads for 2001 Minis, you will find that generally they are on a 51 plate. Now, you might be wondering why these pilot build cars exist and how you spot them. Well, the thing to look at is the number plate. These are all on a Y registration. And what is important to remember is that 2001 was the year that the British number plate system changed. Up until the middle of 2001, it had been the first letter of the number plate denoted what year the car was registered. But from the middle of 2001, it was a two-figure thing. And so 51 meant the second half of 2001. And all the customer Minis that you find if you go scouring the classified ads will be on 51 plates. But BMW needed cars for the press launch, for dealer training, technician training, internal training and testing and proving. And of course, let's say just the pilot build itself, so putting these things down the production line and working out exactly how they were going to screw them together fast enough to be a viable production product. And so they registered, I think, around 600 of them on Y registration plates in early 2001. The earliest ones coming out, I think, in April, and quite a few more coming out in May. So this short period of time is the birthday period of the early Minis. There are photos of one or two cars on an X plate because there had been pre-production cars around for a couple of years by this point. In fact, the car was first shown as an external mock-up on a Punto platform at the Munich Motor Show in 1997. So people knew what the car was going to look like for about 4 years before it actually hit the market. And blind testing had happened before that with unbadged models put alongside potential rivals, Fiestas, Puntos, that kind of thing. But when they started the BMW Mini network, there wasn't the whole individual showrooms we have today. Each BMW dealer that took on Mini just had a small corner set aside with completely different branding, the fun, exciting, funky Mini branding. Bright neons and matte black, that was the vibe. It was very, very cool and trendy. But pre-launch, each dealership got one car, and that was put under a shiny sheet in the showroom, and that's where this car came in. This was under the shiny sheet at Scotall Mini in Leeds, and on that customer invite-only day, this car had the sheet pulled off, and this was the car that those invited guests got to see and then sit in and push all the buttons and break that button off. Then it became a demo car for Leeds Mini. In fact, the response, despite the fact that some people didn't like it, classic Mini owners were very much split on whether it was okay, acceptable, or the devil on wheels. Even, as I mentioned earlier, Alex Moulton, the designer of the hydrogas suspension of the original Mini, he had been involved in working on a replacement concept as well, but his idea and his input into the project was dropped when BMW finalised it was going to be struts and Z-axle, no hydrogas in this version. He was extremely bitter. I've actually met him a couple of years after this car came out, and he was not happy at all. It's fair to say the mood of the lunch and the tone changed significantly as soon as this car was mentioned. He thought it was too big, he thought it was too heavy, he thought they'd taken safety too far in making it as big and heavy as it is. Other people, though, were of a different mind. John Cooper, for example, he was more than happy to have his name put on the Cooper and the Cooper Works. So he was very happy to continue his association with the brand. He thought it was a great thing. And public opinion, public reaction was generally very, very good. In fact, it was so strong that when I first saw one of these at the NEC Motor Show, I think it was NEC in 2001, there were no cars you could get in on the ground floor. The cars you could actually climb into and look at properly were upstairs. And at the time I had an Alfa 146. Because I could show them that key and say I was thinking of changing from an Alfa to a Mini, they let me upstairs and sit in one of the things. Gave me a cup of tea, which is quite nice. And I was pretty much all set to change my 146 for a red Cooper with a white chili pack, same as this. A red car with white roof, white wheels and white mirrors. My only thing I hadn't decided on was the size of the wheels, because it looks better with the bigger wheels, and they engineered the suspension specifically to cope with the bigger wheels, but it does ride more nicely on these smaller rims, 15 inches. Anyway, my Alfa got hit in the back by a 38-ton truck and I became all safety conscious. And I made a bad choice, really, knowing what I know now, because I went and bought a Freelander thinking bigger is better. Turns out that this Mini, the R50, is definitely a stronger shell, a stronger platform than the Freelander if it was to be involved in an accident. The internal wranglings between BMW and Rover were really quite bitter. Rover engineers were absolutely excellent and really good at turning things around on a shoestring, being up against it. And so they came up with some really creative solutions that made the Mini work. It was a BMW project. The idea of a replacement started under Rover purely, with a very Anglophile Bernd Pichstrider, I can't say his name properly, at the helm. He wanted it built in Britain, so it carried on being a British product. And for the majority of the development period, it was. It wasn't until he left the company in 1999 that things were taken even more in-house at BMW. For the most part, it was a BMW-led but Rover-engineered project. So there's a lot of Rover parts and Rover expertise in this car, but with BMW direction and money behind it. If you want to take a deeper dive into this, because I can't go into all the detail necessary for the entire development story because it's a very, very long, convoluted tale, check out the AR Online website. There's some really good background information to the development of this car. Great interview with Frank Stevenson. As these cars have aged, a few things have come to light. The electrics have turned out to be a bit of an issue. The airbag light seems to be a constant problem, certainly on this car, I think a few others as well. The body control unit and ECU can throw a lot of issues as well. On the whole, I would say touch wood, but there's nothing wooden in this car. This has been a pretty good one, considering this car, okay, started off as a dealer demonstrator in Leeds, found its way onto the Fens, where I think it was passing between agricultural workers who were coming into the country to work for a season and selling it to the next rotation of people coming in for working for a season before going home again. So it's got 14 owners on it, and when I bought it, it was cosmetically not very well looked after, but mechanically seemed to have been serviced pretty well. But this car just drives fantastically, apart from the battery going flat, because I leave it parked up for far too long at a time. This has been a brilliant, brilliant car. I've had to do virtually nothing mechanical to it apart from just service it. So these can be tough cars. It's also one of the few cars I've actually bought deliberately. 5 years ago, when these were 15 and we couldn't believe that it was 15 years of the new Mini, I was doing a feature in Modern Mini magazine with the editor Martin. We were just blown away by the design of these cars and the fact that we both felt it was definitely going to be a future classic that was worth buying, grabbing hold of one and holding on to for the future. Of course, 20 years ago when this car came out, it was just one car. Well, two versions, the Mini Cooper and the Mini 1. No one knew back then that it was the start of, well, an empire. These things absolutely exploded in popularity, and now 20 years later, 4 generations on I think it is, we've had so many variations. The Clubman, the convertible, the Club van, then now we've got the 5-door Mini. Okay, the car has grown enormously, and personally, in my humble opinion, I do think the R50, the original though, is the OG, is the best. It's the one that captures the spirit of a classic Mini the best. It's also one I think drives the best as well. The newer ones, as they've got bigger and bigger, these ones just seem better and better in comparison. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this look at what was really quite an impressive and different car 20 years ago. Now that its replacement generations have evolved into a far bigger thing, this has become a definite future classic. If you've enjoyed this, please as always hit like and subscribe, and join me again next time driving something completely different.